Good morning, or depending on when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and as always told, out of Voice of Radio. So today, we're going to be taking a look at another new supporter card. And I'll tell you what, ladies and gentlemen, this one's a little bit weird and a little bit different and kind of fun. Now, we recently, in Unbroken Bonds, we had a card for Green's Exploration, and Red's Challenge. But we didn't get a card for Blue. Well, great news, ladies and gentlemen. Might I introduce you to Blue's strategy? I mean, look, they were, let's go. Those games, they were fun. There's 3 of them. We only had 2. Set complete. Yay! But what does it actually do? Well, obviously our translation here has come from the lovely David Hochmann. You can probably guess by now. There are other translators we use. They're all lovely people. Anyone who ever helps me out on any of my projects, I love them. But we usually use David. And what it does, at the end of this turn, draw until you have 8 cards in your hand. And there's so much going on here in terms of whether this is actually a good card or not. One of the things you guys are probably thinking of immediately here is Lily. Because you see, Lily lets you draw until you've got 6 cards in hand, unless it is your first turn of the game, in which case you draw until you've got 8 cards in hand. And we've all been there. We've all played a turn 1 Lily and drawn until we got 8 cards in hand. It's a glorious thing. Well, this is that every single turn. You always get to draw until you get 8 cards in your hand. This is cool. Here's the thing, though. You don't draw until the end of your turn. So what this basically means is you're not actually doing much this turn. You are instead setting yourself up for next turn, which is kind of awkward. Because let's say, for argument's sake, you're playing a Zapdos deck. They were the bane of my existence in Bristol, so we might as well mention them here. Maybe it'll help me get over the trauma. So Zapdos here, really nice attack, 80 damage if it became active, but that doesn't KO a huge amount of stuff. So generally speaking, they're going to need Electro Power. Or you're going to be looking for some kind of switching card, so you can switch into Jirachi. Use Jirachi's ability to look at the top 5 cards of your deck, find and train a card and put it into your hand. Or, after having used Jirachi, you're going to be looking for an escape board to retreat it. Although, to be fair, if Jirachi's in the active, he can find his own gosh darned escape board. Seriously, that's like the whole point of his ability. Now, we've all been in those situations where we just need something. We just need to get something going here. And in those situations, we drop a Lily for 6. Or we drop a Cynthia to shuffle our hand into our deck and draw a new hand of 6. Blue's strategy won't do that. Blue's strategy will not allow you to search for it and use it now. Yeah, sure, you might draw that Electro Power, but what good's it going to do you now? You've already missed the KO. And that's weird. But there are definitely circumstances in which we're going to want to use it. One thing I do need to mention, though, before we go any further, we're still going to have Judge post-rotation. And although we've lost Marshadow, Boo Hiss, etc., we're going to have Reset Stamp. Reset Stamp is a one-sided end. Reset Stamp says that your opponent shuffles their hand into their deck and draws a number of cards equal to their remaining prize cards. That's what it does. And your opponent can use this to grief you if you're playing Blue strategy. You can play this, draw until you get 8 cards in hand, Judge puts them down to 4. You can use this to get 8 cards in hand, Reset Stamp might put you down to 1 or 2. The problem here, and it is a genuine problem, is that you might end up worse off than you started because your opponent decides if you keep this hand, not you. You get the hand at the end of your turn, and it is up to your opponent as to whether you keep it. So look, there's a couple significant downsides to this card. Firstly, the fact that you get the cards at the end of your turn and can't use them during your turn. And secondly, the fact that because you're doing it as your turn ends, then your opponent can just hurt you. The other thing is that this is at the end of your turn. What's the last thing you do at the end of your turn? You attack. Now, we're going to need a ruling confirmation as to whether you draw your cards for prizes before or after. I believe you would draw your prizes beforehand, because essentially during your turn, you take the attack. But then again, you do check for a KO between turns, so that is an interesting one. Because otherwise, you could draw until you got 8, and then KO and EX, and then all of a sudden, GX, and then all of a sudden you got 10 cards in hand. I don't think it really changes my opinion on the card one way or the other, but it is something that we need to have a little bit of, at least a consideration of here. So the question becomes, what decks are going to want to play this? And one of the obvious answers is anyone early game. Anyone in the early game is going to love this, because it's kind of like Kiawe. Kiawe lets you attach 4 energy from your deck to one of your Pokemon. They have to be fire energy, and then your turn ends. And that's kind of like this, except if it's turn 1, there is no reason to play this over Lily, because Lily lets you just draw. Now, there is an exception to this, and the exception is Lieutenant Surge's strategy. Now, this does depend on you having Lieutenant Surge's strategy and Lily and Blue's strategy in hand all at the same time. But what you essentially do is you play Lieutenant Surge's strategy, play Lily to draw until hopefully you've got 8 cards in hand, play as many as you want, and then at some point play Blue's strategy, and then you would draw until you got 8 cards in hand at the end of your turn. And also, you could do this before you played Lily, so then you'd have 1 fewer card in hand, so that you would draw 1 more card using Lily. I don't know if it's a perfect situation, but it is something that springs to mind as at least a potential option here. And then, of course, we've got stall decks. Stall decks will love this. But are we going to have stall decks post-rotation? So, let's take a step back. Let's go to, say, the expanded format. One deck that's been pretty good in the expanded format. It's dropped off a little bit lately, but Wailord EX. And Wailord EX, 250 HP, basic Pokemon, all of that. And then what you essentially do is you play stuff like Tropical Beach, and at the end of your turn, you draw until you got 7 cards in hand. Well, you draw until 7, and then that ends your turn. Okay, that's kind of cool, I suppose. But here, it's basically the same thing. And the thing about Wailord is that what you really want to do is play cards like Max Potion and Crushing Hammer. But if you want to play cards like Max Potion and Crushing Hammer, you've got to have cards in your hand like Max Potion and Crushing Hammer. And this will allow you to do so. And this is strictly better draw than Tropical Beach. Now, the other argument here is that Tropical Beach is a stadium and you can just use it every turn. But then again, the other argument is if I'm not using Tropical Beach to draw, I can use Rough Seas to heal. Yeah, it swings and roundabouts. Now, to be honest, stall decks are not looking so good post-rotation. We're losing a lot of the tricks, like, for instance, Max Potion, like the Regigigas from Crimson Invasion, like the Hooper from Shining Legend. So, we haven't got great options post-rotation for stalling, but in any stalling deck we ever get, this is going to be great. It's a weird kind of card. It's good in the early game, but we might have better options. It's good in stalling decks, but we might not really have stalling decks. And if you just always use it for draw, you run the risk of not drawing the cards on the turn you want them. Or you run the risk of your opponent just dropping a reset stamp and ruining it. I mean, I've played Makago in a bunch of decks, and there's nothing worse than really needing a card, using Makago to put it on top of your deck, and not having a way to draw it, so you get the card next turn, but you don't get it when you need it. I'm going to be giving this between 3 and 4 Wassies. We don't give half Wassies, that would be barbaric. I like it as a card, and I love that we've got a new draw card. I just think it's got very niche uses. But that's me. I would very much like to know what you think. So please do let me know in the comment section. Go nuts, be nice. And then make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter at The Wassie, and Twitch for some live action at twitch.tv/TheWassie. patreon.com/PTCGRadio. If you want to support the channel, get some bonus podcasts and all that, head on over to patreon.com/PTCGRadio, where you can do exactly that. And please make sure you're checking out youtube.com/WassiePlays, where we talk about games that don't have Pokemon in. But by far the most important thing, as always, look after yourselves till next time. Thank you very much for watching. My name is Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.